To me, looking to me.
Carl Ellefsen. I was an apprentice fitter and machinist in the railway where I started my career in 1952, and I finished the service on almost 42 years as a manager of City Rail stores. In between, I'd worked on the manufacture of self-propelled rail cars as a tradesman, and then later years I was in the production of those cars as a planner, production planner, and that went for 20 odd years out of my 42. Then I was transferred to Clyde Wagon Works, where I was there as the control planner, looking after there, in which I learnt my job as a production engineer. While I was there, they elevated me to, and then I went to the CME's office, which is the other in Wilson Street, Redfern, where I went there as a supply officer in '85.
Right, so can you remember your very first day on the job at Eveleigh as a young man?
Yes, the memory comes very vivid. Each day we'd walk on, we had a special train we had to be on to get to work. We carried our bag and we walked in and had a locker where we changed in open space into our overalls. Everyone's on view. Then we had an introduction with the sub-foreman. He knew we were coming because we were on an apprentice rotation program, and that was my second stint. I'd been to Elcar and then came to Eveleigh as the apprentice in July for 1952.
And how old were you?
I just turned 16. And
do you remember liking it?
No, it was hard work because we were doing machining and you hadn't handled a machine up to this stage. You'd seen them many times, but then you had to work it. But we had supervising tradesmen who showed us the ropes, and we had a bit of a contract, as you say, between the groups of boys, because each machine, they'd rotate each week, and we'd say, how many did you do last week? And we'd have to try and outdo that number, and so we had a manufacturing competition between the kids. And then when it came to knock off time, you got a bucket of hot water, or cold water to have a wash in. If you warmed it up, you was lucky, and you got a bit of a wash up and changed there with the locker next year, and got your gear off and back into gear to go home. And then the group of people that left the workshop after 4 o'clock and walked up outside the building was like a football match today with the number of people that's going up those stairs. And that was the very impressionable time, very impressionable. But it was part of the training we got, because we learnt life at the hard face, because you met all sorts of people, and you got good tradesmen and you got tradesmen you didn't like. They had a different attitude of looking after kids, and we were 16-year-old, we didn't know the ropes, we weren't as smart as what the kids are today, I don't think, but we at least learned our craft from the basis.
Can you tell me about, when you say some people were good at it and some people weren't so good, can you tell me any memories of any sort of people you worked with who weren't good at it?
Some of the kids we had were trying, but they just didn't have the speed. But then again, some got onto a machine later on in life, became experts. But then other boys changed and went to fitting, and they were adapted. But you wanted to finish your time. That was the objective. You wanted to finish your time.
And you told me, when I remember when we were sitting in that circle, you said to me, everyone talks about recycling now, but can you tell us about the recycling that you meant?
Well, later on, when you went to locomotive overhauling, the locomotive was stripped bare to the frame. Anything that came off was brass, was sent to a brass section, and they recycled it if it couldn't be repaired, it went down to the foundry. They'd pull it apart, recondition it and send it back to you. If it was cast iron, it was probably worn out, so it went down to the foundry and they recast one and we machined it and made it to fit. The pistons were cast iron. The rings in the piston were cast iron. The connecting rods had brass bearings. They all went back to the foundry. We used to white metal them. And the nuts and bolts all went into a big bin, and a broken down tradesman or a labourer, and his job was to reclaim the nuts and bolts and the studs and the fittings that we wanted. The only thing we ever renewed was the gasket joints when they all come brand new, and a lot of it was metal to metal joint with red lead and gold size, and good old putty, and mixed with the gold size. So the recycling was never came to us as just a recycling, because it was come up second nature. If it didn't fit into the foundry, and you got another one that was cast ready to go on the job. Nuts, bolts, forge, blacksmith, making nuts and special bolts, cutting up tools. We used to cut up certain bits of tool steel to make all the chisels and the hammers, and the hammersmiths used to do it down the Oliver shop. That was continuous. They'd make special, those little hammers used to make special heads on bolts for special parts of the steam locomotive. The certain parts used to be machined down to a reclaimable size, but then there was other items that they packed out with shim packers that made up that worn part, but it was never into the foundry unless it wasn't reclaimable.
It's a fantastic thing, of that notion of everything being reused.
Well, it was inherited in you that you had to reclaim it, and that was part of the training. You reclaimed every part. And tools, you didn't have a great tool range. If you wanted a tool and had to do a special job, you made the tool to do the job, because you had to get it done. Now, there were certain spanners that they supplied, but mostly in your apprenticeship, you didn't have a great toolbox to carry around, because when you got there you was doing heavy special work. So the tradesmen used to have the heavy tools, but sometimes we'd make up our own tools along the way if we had to do it.
Fantastic. And you were going to tell me another story. Was it about buckets?
Yeah, when we finished the day, or the day there, we had a bucket. You were all issued with this bucket, and it was the idea of to wash up before your morning tea, you wash up before lunch, and then had to wash up when you left in the afternoon when you finished your shift. Now, we had an issue of soft soap to go with that bucket, and every fortnight you'd go up to the store and he'd issue you a scoop of soft soap, which was a most obnoxious sort of material that looked like grease, but it eventually helped clean the grease off. And as well, every 2 months he used to get a sweat rag, and the sweat rag was a rag that you used to have to wash up in the bucket as well, so that became like a face washer. It was, and we never objected to it, we accepted it. I mean, that was part of the deal. You didn't realise, but you're working inside the shop, you had men all around you, you got to know them, the work they were doing, but they had a bucket as well. You wasn't on your own with a bucket, they all had their own buckets.
There were lots of stories about the buckets and like the soap and things about the hand basins, how, you know, they had a whole lot of hand basins once, but they didn't use them for a long time because there were union rules about, the union and management couldn't agree.
On the time, I wasn't there, it was an industrial thing, but in those days, apprentices never got in industrial problems. We never got introduced to that till you come out of your time when you went and got a tradesman's job, and the workshop you went to, they made sure you was in a union and you got to the union meetings. It was part of the deal. No, didn't get a lunchtime meeting, you had to be out there with the boys. Yeah, oh yes, and then if you wanted to speak, they'd let you speak, but they groomed you too. So it was part of the thing. And another thing, if you wanted to become a supervisor, one of the expected training, you would go into the union as get a shop steward's job of the section. So you learnt the union side before you be able to get into the supervisor side. So it was part of the management they suggested you do that. It wasn't the troops, it was the management that suggested you learn a bit about the union before you got to become a supervisor. And you wouldn't become a supervisor probably in leading hand in those days unless you had about 10 to 15 years service. And then by the time you got to 20 years service, you might have got what they called a sub-foreman's position, and you'd probably look after 20 to 40 people. You could have a leading hand. But then to get a foreman or a supervisor's job was over the whole lot in the big section. You'd probably be best part of 35 years.
It's so funny because it's so different things. I think we're just about that would do us. But I think that when you think about how people change their jobs now, like every year or two, it's a pretty different sort of situation.
I got into trouble when I was in the supply officer. I used to release orders to bring contractors into the system, and I'd do the record, and because it was budget and all that to look after. And we got this set of people come in to do us a change, and these were the experts, so-called, to come in, and the supervisor that asked me to fix up the order, he was an engineer, and I said to him, "Those blokes on that letter you gave me, none of them's ever been a job more than 5 to 7 years. And he said, "You've got to hide to criticise them." I said, "We've been here for 30 odd years." And I said, "We could tell you twice as much as what they could." And he didn't like it. Yeah, I'll never forget it. I got roasted for it, but I spoke my mind. No.
Carl, thank you so much for coming.